Welcome to a journey through time where history isn't just a memory, but a vivid landscape of events and emotions waiting to be explored anew. Tonight, you find yourself in the polished corridors of Greenwich Palace. The rush of silk, the hum of lute strings, and the faint aroma of roasted swan drift through the air. You're not here for a banquet or a coronation. You're here to meet someone surprising. Before the gout, before the Six Wives saga, before the codpieces became conversation starters, Henry VIII is a teenage prince. And he's dazzling. His hair is golden, his skin unfashionably tan from days outdoors, his legs famously shapely, his mood competitive, clever, and just a smidge dramatic. He's the kind of royal who composes songs for fun and challenges courtiers to wrestling matches between speeches. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive a single morning in his company. You're too chill, too modern, and not nearly obsessed enough with Latin verb conjugations or proving your honor in full plate armor. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. It's always a treat to see who's drifting off across the world with me. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up early today. Not because you want to, but because you live under the same roof as teenage Henry. And he is up. By dawn, he's hawking with falcons. By breakfast, he's writing theological poetry. And by mid-morning, he's at his private tilt yard practicing spear throwing with a competitive scowl that screams, "I will be remembered." Historians still argue whether his youthful idealism was genuine or performance art. But one thing's clear, young Henry is very into being young Henry. You try to keep up as he bounds between interests. 1 hour he's composing a madrigal. The next, he's sketching military uniforms for imaginary armies. It's exhausting. It's like rooming with a Renaissance golden retriever. Did you know he was never supposed to be king? Henry VIII was the spare, not the heir. His older brother Arthur had the throne locked down until he didn't. Arthur died at just 15, and suddenly the second son, with a gift for sport and scripture, was next in line. He took the job seriously, or at least seriously loudly. One fringe tidbit: Henry would sometimes disguise himself as a commoner and sneak out of court to attend tournaments or mingle with villagers just to gauge public opinion of himself. Spoiler, they usually liked him. He was handsome. He gave out money like it was medieval TikTok clout. And he had good legs, like really good legs. People wrote poems about those calves. Another oddball fact: as a teenager, he invented his own coat of arms variation. Why? Because the standard Tudor line wasn't cool enough. He added a personal greyhound, then had it stitched on every banner, robe, and napkin he could reach. You watch him now, seated beside his court tutor, dramatically reading aloud a Roman epic, while simultaneously balancing a fencing foil on his knee. No one's impressed. Everyone's scared to admit it. Henry VIII didn't grow into ego. He launched with it. But beneath the performance, there's something earnest. You see it in the way he kneels at chapel still sincere, or the way he lights up when discussing theology, not politics, but the metaphysics of divine justice, which, let's be real, is pretty niche for a 17-year-old. He's obsessed with being right, with being remembered, and with having better shoes than everyone else. You trail him to his quarters, where he opens a chest lined in velvet. Inside, dozens of belts, tunics, and even armor, all in shades of crimson and gold. His favorite colors: bold, regal, the kind that demand attention. He tosses you a pair of breeches and asks if you want to come spar before supper. You politely decline. Because Henry doesn't spar. He wins dramatically and then writes sonnets about it. You slip away to the garden where a servant sighs beside the rose bushes. "He's exhausting," she whispers, "but he's the best we've got." And so, Guy, your first day with Henry ends not with scandal, but admiration and maybe a little dread. Because if he's this much as a teenager, what happens when he gets power? You'll find out. For now, enjoy the roses, the silence, and the memory of the world's most ambitious adolescent, inventing greatness one greyhound crest at a time. You blink awake to the clink of goblets and the faint sound of someone tuning a lute badly. It's still early, but your royal roommate has been up for hours. Today, you'll follow Henry not to war or romance, but into the stars. No, not literally. Although, let's be honest, if Tudor rocketry had existed, he probably would have commissioned it just to beat France into orbit. Instead, we're going somewhere just as dramatic: his obsession with astrology and horoscopes. Henry VIII. You see, believe the cosmos had things to say about his love life, his wars, his breakfast probably, and he wasn't alone. Astrology was the medieval equivalent of Google. Rulers everywhere used it to decide anything from invasions to haircut timing. You shuffle into the privy chamber and find Henry poring over a vellum scroll, eyebrows furrowed. He's consulting his court astrologer, a very nervous man with permanently ink-stained fingers, and a suspicious tendency to check the alignment of Venus before answering anything. Henry's got a big question. Is it a good day to write to the Pope? You'd think politics might guide that. Nope. Not if Mercury's retrograde. Mainstream fact time. Henry had astrologers regularly calculate auspicious hours for royal acts. Some believe he even scheduled the timing of Anne Boleyn's coronation based on planetary alignments. Today's reading mixed. Mars is sulky. Saturn's in a mood. But Venus, Venus is smiling, which apparently means send the letter but include extra flattery. You try not to snort. To modern eyes, it's bonkers. But for Henry, astrology wasn't mysticism, it was strategic intelligence. And yes, historians still argue just how deeply Henry relied on it. Was it an affectation to impress the scholarly court, a private comfort, or just an excuse to delay decisions until Jupiter stopped throwing tantrums? While they debate, you wander into the palace library where volumes on celestial patterns sit next to books on hawking, and oddly an illustrated guide to fashionable beard styles. One quirky tidbit: Henry once ordered his astrologer to redo a prediction because the outcome made him cranky. Not, oh well, fate is fate. No, more like, redo the universe, I don't like the answer. Another, he may have once blamed a solar eclipse for a botched military campaign. The sun turned its back, he grumbled. You imagine the generals nodding solemnly while quietly wondering if maybe poor supply lines were to blame? Later at dinner, Henry regales his guest with his latest star-based theory. According to his astrologer, his birthday aligns with legendary rulers of the past: Augustus Caesar, Alexander the Great, and a Babylonian king whose name he cannot pronounce but insists he resembles in a regal aura. You try to look impressed. He notices. You don't believe in the stars? He asks, mock offense in his voice. You smile politely and mumble something about open to celestial possibilities. He beams. The court astrologer gives you a grateful look that says, thanks for not getting me fired today. That night, back in your chamber, you find a parchment slipped under the door. It's your own horoscope. Apparently Venus favors you this week and Mercury suggests caution in closet spaces. You don't know what that means. But you light a candle, whisper a polite thank you to whatever planet's in charge, and try not to wonder what Henry's stars have in store for you tomorrow. After all, when you live in the orbit of a king who thinks Jupiter influences marriage proposals, it's best to stay in the astrologer's good books. Today starts with trumpets. Not metaphorically actual blaring, spit-flecked fanfare outside your chamber window, because Henry is in the tilt yard. Again. But something's different. There's a tension in the air, and not the good kind you get before roasted venison. No, this is the kind of tension that comes before your monarch flings himself at another armored noble with a stick longer than a flagpole. Yes, we've arrived at that moment, the jousting accident that may have changed everything? You shuffle out bleary-eyed just in time to see Henry, nearly 45, thundering across the list field on a white horse with a gold caparison. His armor gleams, his plume bounces, his thighs grip the saddle like a man who still thinks he's 20. Spoiler, he is not 20. With a cry, he charges. And then crack, the lance strikes. But not the target. Henry slams to the ground. Time slows. You freeze. So does the crowd. A few shriek. A few faint. One courtier quietly vomits into his doublet. He's not moving. He's not moving. The king lies unconscious for 2 hours. Mainstream fact. This jousting accident in 1536 left Henry with a serious leg injury. He never jousted again, and some say he was never the same. He wakes up groggy, angry, confused, and something changes. You notice it in the days that follow. He's shorter-tempered, more suspicious, less patient with sermons, more interested in punishments. The sparkle that once made him Renaissance Instagram royalty has dimmed, just a bit. Historians still argue whether this head injury triggered a personality shift. Some suggest brain trauma, others chronic pain that made him bitter. Either way, the Henry that emerges is not the Henry who flirted with court ladies while composing bass lines for madrigals. One quirky tidbit: in the weeks after the fall, he insisted on having his food tasted twice, not for poison, but because he thought the first taste dulled the flavor. Another, he ordered 7 new walking sticks, each with a different pommel animal. One was an otter, another a lion with ruby eyes. No one was sure if they were for balance or intimidation. Your own role shifts subtly. Where once he invited you to card games and demanded you rank his outfits, now he just mutters about France and stares into the fireplace. He sketches maps at odd hours and talks to himself about loyalty and God's favor. You learn to tread carefully, especially around Anne Boleyn, because it's early 1536 and her shine is fading fast. Henry stops joining her for music practice. He starts accusing her of imagined slights. He praises Jane Seymour's embroidery a little too loudly. You wisely compliment no one. One rainy evening, you hear him whispering to his confessor, voice low and sharp, "God sent me that blow. A warning. I must correct the kingdom." You pull your blanket higher, because correction in Tudor terms rarely ends well. In the weeks that follow, Anne is arrested, condemned, executed. You remember Henry's bloodied face from that tournament, still and pale? And you wonder, did the fall cause the spiral? Or was it just the excuse he needed? It's a question no historian can answer. But here, walking the silent palace halls, you start to understand something quietly chilling. Kings don't fall gracefully. And when they do, they rarely rise the same. You don't sleep well after that. How could you? One minute you're watching Henry charm musicians with madrigal trivia. The next you're peering into the psyche of a man who just nodded solemnly while a bishop declared his second wife a seductress sent by the devil. And now you wake to the low groan of trumpets again, but this time they're playing a wedding march. It's Jane Seymour's day, or as Henry calls her, the good one. You join the throng of courtiers in a flower-stuffed corridor, craning your neck as Jane glides past in cream silk. She looks serene, resigned, possibly terrified. This is wedding number 3. But it feels like the first to Henry. He says it constantly. This time he declares, "I have a wife who obeys." You nod politely. You don't say what you're thinking, which is obeys whom? The king, the church, or the voices in his dreams that sound suspiciously like St. George? Still, Jane is gentle, soft-spoken. She doesn't argue, doesn't challenge, and doesn't play the lute, which might honestly be why Henry likes her so much. Mainstream fact: Jane Seymour was queen for just over a year before dying from postnatal complications. But in that short span, she gave Henry the one thing he wanted more than another velvet doublet: a son. Baby Edward, heir security, Tudor legacy secured, and the court erupts. You've never seen Henry happier. He weeps openly. He holds the boy like a relic. He praises Jane as his only true wife, which awkwardly he says in front of portraits of his other wives. Historians still argue whether Jane was truly his favorite or if her tragic death simply froze her in that role. But to Henry she becomes legend, the pure one, the blessed one, the woman he doesn't blame for anything. That's rare in this palace. Quirky fact number 1. After Jane's death, Henry ordered her heart to be embalmed separately and placed in a golden box beneath the altar of Hampton Court. Like a holy artifact. Not creepy at all. Quirky fact number 2. He had a coin minted showing her profile, something he didn't do for Anne Boleyn. Ever, even during the marriage. You wander the palace on the day of her funeral, which is surprisingly quiet. Henry doesn't attend. He says he's too grief-stricken. He does, however, ask for all her tapestries to be removed so they don't make him weep. His version of grief is selective. Later, you find him in his library staring at a tiny portrait of Jane painted onto the back of a mirror. He catches your eye, says nothing, then flips the mirror over and walks out. He will go on to marry 3 more women. But you already sense Jane stays his favorite? Not because she was lively or smart or passionate, but because she died before she could disappoint him. The most dangerous position in Tudor England isn't court jester or master of horse. It's Henry's wife, and Jane blessedly never lived long enough to fall out of favor. You wake to find Henry in a bath, not metaphorical, an actual wooden tub ringed in rose petals and soap that smells like lavender mixed with old bread. He's humming, loudly and off-key, which can only mean one thing. He's fallen in love again. Enter Anne of Cleves, or rather not yet. Because before Anne arrives in England, there's the small matter of a portrait. You peer over Henry's shoulder at the painting Holbein has delivered. Anne stares out serenely, hair neatly tucked gown, modest and brocaded. To be fair, she looks fine. Not like a goddess, not like a goblin. Just very competent. She's perfect, Henry says, beaming. You raise an eyebrow? She looks kind, you offer diplomatically. And that dear friend is how Henry VIII proposes marriage. Mainstream fact. Henry agreed to marry Anne of Cleves after seeing a portrait by Hans Holbein the Younger. Political alliance with the German Duchy of Cleves made the match appealing. The image flattered her, but oh, was there drama when they met. The day Anne arrives, the court is buzzing. Henry, too excited to wait, throws on a disguise, yes really, and dashes off to surprise her at Rochester. Because nothing says romance like a sweaty monarch bursting in unannounced. Quirky tidbit number 1. He actually believed that true love would reveal itself instantly if he kissed her in disguise. Spoiler, it did not. Anne, understandably startled, did not swoon. She didn't even smile. Henry backed away red-faced and muttering. She's nothing like the painting he sulks later. She smells German, he adds. You try not to sigh audibly. The wedding goes ahead anyway, but the vibes are off. Henry complains to his doctors. She repulses me, he whispers. I cannot do my duty. They nod solemnly, then immediately gossip to the entire Privy Council. Historians still argue whether Anne was truly unattractive to Henry, or if the failed romance was political sabotage, performance anxiety, or simple mismatched expectations. Either way, the marriage is never consummated, which in Tudor terms means you can get it annulled faster than you can say, awkward honeymoon. Anne, to her eternal credit, agrees. She's not interested in being beheaded. Instead, she accepts the annulment, receives a generous pension, and becomes the king's beloved sister. Quirky tidbit, number 2. She outlives all of Henry's other wives' lives peacefully in England, throws parties, and is rumored to have beaten him at cards more than once. You pass her later that year in a garden. She's sipping wine and laughing with the ladies of court. She sees you winks and says, "Never trust a man who wears a codpiece larger than his horse." You choke on your biscuit. She's not wrong. Henry, meanwhile, starts interviewing prospects again. He says he's done with portraits. You don't believe him for a second. The mood in the palace shifts like a candle guttering in a draft. One day Henry is brooding over maps of France, the next, he's hosting a masque where everyone must dress as woodland animals. You're handed a fox mask and gently told not to make direct eye contact with the king if he's wearing antlers. Enter Catherine Howard, a teenager, barely educated, more fond of dancing than scripture. She arrives with Giggle's silk slippers and the kind of naive confidence that can only come from not yet knowing how dangerous love is in a place like this. You watch Henry watch her. She glides across the chamber with cheeks flushed and gown slightly too sheer for comfort. Henry's eyes light up like someone just brought him a tray of pies and flattery. "She's like a rosebud," he murmurs. You resist the urge to whisper yes, but some rosebuds have thorns. Mainstream fact. Catherine Howard, Henry's fifth wife, was his cousin's maid of honor. She was young, possibly only 16 when they married, and he was nearing 50. He doted on her with almost manic affection, calling her "my rose without a thorn." You're there when he gives her the title. She's smiling, overwhelmed, and slightly alarmed by the size of the ruby necklace he insists she wear immediately. "Does it match my eyes?" she asks you later. You don't know what to say, because her eyes are scared. At first, the court humors this odd pairing. He adores her. He gives her gifts, daily rings, gowns, a lapdog named Sweetheart. They eat together, pray together, and you suspect Henry starts brushing his hair again because of her. But beneath it all, attention hums. Historians still argue how much Catherine knew about the rules of court, or whether she fully understood how dangerous her past relationships could be in a world that worships appearances. Because yes, there were lovers before Henry, perhaps even a fiancé, and worse letters. Quirky tidbit number 1. Henry had his own spies search her chamber, including inside hollowed-out hairbrushes. They even examined her embroidery for secret love symbols. Quirky tidbit number 3. When questioned, one of Catherine's former sweethearts claimed he'd taught her music. No one believed that meant the lute. You're nearby the day the truth unravels. Henry hears whispers, then testimonies, then confessions. He turns pale, then red, then alarmingly quiet. "She lied to me," he says. "She lied." He walks the garden for hours, alone. Later, he declares her guilty of treason, the same charge that took Anne Boleyn's head. You visit Catherine in the Tower the night before her execution. She's calm, or trying to be. She asks for a block to practice laying her head on. And the next day she dies with the words, "I die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper." Henry never speaks her name again. He wears black for weeks. Or maybe it just seems that way because the palace feels darker now. You remember that fox mask. You remember Catherine's laughter, brief as candlelight. And you think roses bloom. But in Henry's garden they rarely last long. You awaken to silence. Not the usual morning bustle of servants hauling wash basins and dogs yapping at breeches, but a thick, uncanny quiet, the kind that settles after too much drama. Even the geese in the moat seem to be whispering. Henry has not left his chambers in days. You shuffle down the corridor and find the guards unusually somber. A steward whispers that the king has taken to mourning in Layer's black tunic. Black hose, black thoughts. You nod. That tracks. Because after Catherine Howard, Henry isn't just bruised, he's hollowed out, like a loaf that fell in the oven. Or a man realizing he's buried 2 wives and divorced 2 more. And his leg, oh the leg, mainstream fact. After the jousting injury, Henry developed chronic ulcers on his left leg. By the time of Catherine Howard's execution, the wounds were painful, likely infected, and required frequent draining. The pain affected both his health and his mood. Neither improved with time. You catch glimpses through the doorway. Servants changing his bandages. The king grunting as he tries to rise. He smells of rose water and regret. He shouts at the doctor, "Let it rot, I'll not lose the leg." You try not to picture the alternatives. He orders his meals by the cartload but eats little, mostly pie crust and candied fruits. One day he demands a gooseberry tart and then throws it out the window because the texture offends him. Quirky tidbit number 1. Henry insisted on custom chairs with cutouts to ease pressure on his ulcer. They called it the King's Ring, and no one sat in it after he left the room. Quirky tidbit nus 2. He had his boots lined with ermine fur and clove oil luxury pain management, Tudor style. One day you find him staring at a mural of his younger self, a tapestry he had commissioned showing him as a Roman emperor. He sighs and says, "I used to run in tournaments. Now I limp in dreams." Historians still argue how much his declining health influenced state decisions. Some say his paranoia, political repression, and marriage choices were driven by chronic pain and depression. Others argue he remained shrewd and calculating to the end, just a bit more shouty. Then something unexpected. A spark of life. Her name is Catherine Parr. The sixth. The final. A widow. Intelligent. Pious. Excellent at chess and even better at not getting executed. You meet her during a quiet supper. She speaks softly to the king, quotes scripture compliments the way his beard catches candlelight. You almost choke on your wine. But Henry smiles. Smiles. It's the most terrifying thing you've seen all week. Because it means he's about to propose. And sure enough, 3 days later, engagement. Catherine accepts wisely. And unlike his previous wives, she comes equipped with a library. She encourages Henry to read theology. She even helps reconcile him with his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, who you haven't seen in months because politics, stepmother drama, and the royal family tree looks more like a flaming shrub. Catherine helps restore dignity to the court. You'd almost believe in happy endings. Almost. But even this is a Tudor palace. Peace is never permanent. You find yourself in a library. Not your usual haunt in the palace. This one smells less like musty ink and more like cinnamon bark and wax-polished shelves. Catherine Parr's doing. She's decided that the court needs less drama and more literacy. And honestly, you're not opposed. Henry, of course, is back in his custom chair. Leg propped up, goblet of spiced wine in hand, listening while Catherine reads aloud from a treatise on divine kingship. Occasionally, he interrupts to clarify that the author clearly meant me specifically. Catherine smiles patiently. You suspect she's rolling her eyes behind the book. Mainstream fact: Catherine Parr was highly educated and deeply religious. She not only supported the Protestant Reformation, but also authored several books, becoming the first woman to publish under her own name in English in England. She also managed somehow to survive being married to Henry VIII. You once heard a courtier say that Catherine Parr treated being queen like she was nursing a particularly spoiled tiger. You approve of the metaphor. Henry grows calmer around her. Less prone to shouting at shadows, he even allows her to engage in religious debates with scholars, though not in public and not during gout flare-ups. One evening she proposes a royal family dinner. You nearly faint from shock. But it happens. Mary arrives stiff as a statue. Elizabeth wary but curious. Edward a serious little lad with a forehead built for frowning. They dine on roast pheasant and sweet mead while Catherine plays peacekeeper. It almost feels like a real family, until Henry insists on composing a hymn about himself. Quirky tidbit number 1. He titles it A Ballad of Noble Henry and His Thrice Noble Wives. Catherine gently suggests revising the number. Quirky tidbit. Nokaranihu? He believed his musical compositions were equal to any court in Europe. He once had a lute player imprisoned for suggesting otherwise. The marriage is remarkably stable. Catherine nurses him during illness, organizes his correspondence, even convinces him to update the line of succession to include both Mary and Elizabeth, setting up the future of England in ways even Henry doesn't fully grasp. Historians still argue whether Catherine Parr was simply a brilliant survivor or a quiet reformer who subtly steered the king's final years toward reconciliation and order. What's clear, she knew exactly how far to lean in and exactly when to smile and pour more wine. You find her one afternoon composing a book of prayers. She invites you to sit. The quill scratches softly against parchment. In the background, Henry snores from an armchair, one sock hanging halfway off. Catherine looks over and says, "He's difficult, but I'd rather be here than remembered as a ghost." You don't ask what she means. You already know. The air in the palace is shifting again. You notice it first in the way the servants speak in hushed tones, or how the guards at Henry's chamber door now stand with a different kind of stillness. Less like sentries, more like mourners waiting for confirmation. Henry is fading. He knows it. Everyone does. But no one says it aloud, as if the king might smite them from his canopied bed with one final wheezing decree. You find him in the early morning light staring at the fire. A nurse tends to his leg, which has taken on the texture of boiled leather and is being poulticed with mustard seeds and prayers. He waves her off, not rudely, just tiredly. "I once ran across the tilt yard in armor," he mutters. "Now I can barely reach my chamber pot. You consider offering comfort, but this is Henry VIII. Instead, you offer wine." He takes it with a nod. Mainstream fact. In the final years of his life, Henry was severely obese, estimated at over 300 pounds and plagued by numerous health issues, including his chronic leg ulcers. His mobility was so restricted that mechanical devices were installed to help hoist him upstairs. He rarely leaves his chambers now. Catherine reads to him, ministers come and go, and a rotating cast of doctors suggest ever more inventive poultices, everything from honey and onions to wine-soaked lint. None of it helps. He smells of decay and rose oil. The once mighty lion is shrinking into his throne. Quirky tidbit Yibonimus 1. Henry had his physicians wrap his ulcers in bandages embroidered with scripture, in the hope that holiness might seep in through the wound. Quirky tidbit enough to 2. He insisted his bed be blessed daily with holy water, and that his food tasters also pray over each dish before tasting. Just in case. Still, his mind is sharp. He revises his will. Names Edward as heir. Reinforces the succession line for Mary and Elizabeth. Distributes property. Issues new titles. Gives his dog a jeweled collar and mutters about teaching it Latin. Historians still argue whether Henry's final political moves were his own doing or manipulated by the ambitious courtiers around him. The Duke of Norfolk, Edward Seymour, even Catherine Parr. Power was shifting long before the body gave out. One evening he calls for you. You sit beside the great bed. He's wearing his fur-trimmed robe and staring at the ceiling. "I was a good king," he says, as if daring you to disagree. "You don't." He chuckles softly. "I built ships, broke Rome, married 6 times. He pauses, and none of them were boring. You nod. He falls asleep mid-sentence. The court waits. You wake to the tolling of the great bell. The one no one likes to hear. Henry is dead. There's no proclamation yet, just servants moving in slow, synchronized dread. Courtiers whispering in corners. The royal physician disappearing behind a curtain with parchment and ink. But, everyone knows. The king has taken his last breath. Or more precisely, he has been eased into the afterlife under a mountain of velvet and perfumed sheets, his once commanding voice reduced to a sigh, his gouty leg finally still. And now comes the scramble. The palace, for all its gold and grandeur, moves like a hive poked with a stick. Succession must be confirmed. Ministers must jostle, and Henry's body... Well, let's talk about the after-death journey. Mainstream fact. When Henry VIII died in January 1547, his body was embalmed and placed in a lead-lined coffin. The journey from Westminster to Windsor took several days in cold weather with rituals and pageantry along the way. Only things didn't go smoothly. Quirky tidbit. Danius 1. During the procession, Henry's coffin was left overnight at Sion Abbey, an ironic twist since he'd dissolved it during the Reformation. In the morning, it was found that the coffin had leaked. Animals had approached. A stray dog had even been spotted licking near the base. You cannot make this up. Quirky tidbit sacretu. The phrase dogs licked his blood was so resonant that it was later folded into Protestant propaganda painting Henry's death as a form of divine punishment or awkward symbolism, depending on your theological leanings. The body itself was reportedly bloated pressurized from internal decomposition. The coffin's seals struggled. One chronicler claimed it had burst. Others said it simply wept. Either way, there was leakage. And not the metaphorical kind. You try not to picture it. You fail. Historians still argue whether these stories were exaggerated by his enemies or simply recorded with the morbid curiosity common to Tudor chroniclers. There's even debate over which details are literal versus literary. But the image sticks the mighty king reduced to a leaking symbol of his own unchecked appetites. At Windsor, his coffin is finally interred in St. George's Chapel beside Jane Seymour, his true queen, as he'd said. The irony is almost too much. You stand among the stone pillars listening to the Latin chants echo off the vaulted ceiling and think he wanted to be remembered as a second Solomon, but he may go down as England's most notorious husband. His tomb is temporary. The elaborate monument he designed for himself never completed. Just a quiet slab over a man who changed the nation, split the church, consumed 6 wives, and once threw a pie at a French ambassador. History won't forget him. But here in this moment, as the choir sings and the smoke from the incense curls toward the rafters, you can't help but feel it's oddly quiet. Henry VIII is gone. Long live the chaos he left behind. You don't even get a week before the rewrites begin. Not of laws, though, those are quietly being updated too, but of memory. Henry's gone and the courtiers are out in full force, armed with anecdotes, rewritten diaries, and convenient forgetfulness. Welcome to the real Tudor afterlife reputation management. First up is the funeral mask. You sit through hours of solemn chanting banners, waving armored effigies clanking down the aisle, and heralds declaring Henry's titles at a pitch that borders on theatrical. Mainstream fact. Henry VIII's funeral was a grand affair featuring an elaborate procession and a lifelike funeral effigy in full armor, which rode atop the coffin like a knight from legend. There's also a painted banner depicting Henry ascending into heaven, which some court jesters whisper was commissioned by Henry himself. He wanted to be seen as a sacred monarch, even posthumously. But then come the rewrites. Quirky tidbit. Number 1. Several nobles begin claiming they always warned Henry about bad decisions, conveniently forgetting the sycophancy of the last 2 decades. One lord insists he suggested the dissolution of monasteries more gently than others. Another suddenly remembers opposing Anne Boleyn loudly. Quirky tidbit number 2. The royal tailors present a ledger showing that Henry's final measurements included a 54-inch waist, and then add a note saying the king wore it well. You doubt that was original copy. Catherine Parr ever composed weeps quietly at the funeral, then promptly moved to secure her dower house. You see her placing prayer books in boxes before Henry's body is even cold. Smart woman. And then there's Edward, 9 years old, stoic, pale, trying to remember the exact phrasing of his father's last blessing. He's too young to rule outright, which means the real power now lies with the Regency Council, a political gladiator match in robes and Latin. Historians still argue whether Henry anticipated this power vacuum. His will appointed 16 executors to guide Edward, but within months, Edward Seymour, the boy's uncle, will emerge as Lord Protector. Some say Henry trusted Seymour. Others suspect Seymour simply moved faster than the rest. You watch Seymour at the funeral, his face blank, his hand already on the boy's shoulder. Power flows toward him like wine toward a tilted goblet. The crown passes quietly, too quietly perhaps. But the real Henry flawed, brilliant, paranoid commanding refuses to rest. You hear it in the whispers, the tavern songs, the nervous glances whenever someone mentions divorce or church taxes. His legacy isn't a tomb. It's a nation transformed and thoroughly exhausted. The palace, once thunderous with Henry's presence, now echoes in a strange, tentative hush. You wander its corridors past portraits with eyes that follow you and tapestries that seem to sigh under their own weight. It's quieter, but not calmer, because Edward VI is now king and 9 years old. Technically, in practice, England is ruled by ambitious men in fancy collars, all elbowing for influence while pretending to pray for guidance. And somewhere amid the incense and Latin, the kingdom starts to shift again. You notice it first in the chapel. Less Latin, more English. Fewer candles, more psalms. Mainstream fact. Under Edward VI, England took a decisive turn toward Protestantism. The Book of Common Prayer was introduced in 1549. Services were held in English instead of Latin, and many traditional Catholic practices were officially abolished, which would have horrified Henry, who, despite breaking from Rome, liked his incense smoky and his saints plentiful. But now religious reformers are celebrating. Even the bread during communion is being simplified. You once overhear a noble mutter, "It's not the body of Christ if it's under-seasoned." The real transformation, though, is architectural. Monasteries already gone under Henry. But now their ruins are being repurposed, turned into schools, mansions, or simply left to crumble as sheep graze beside what used to be centuries of prayer. Quirky tidbit. Yudyamonanani Yailan. One former priory becomes a brewery. Another hosts weekly archery competitions. Yet another is used to store royal party supplies because nothing says reformation like drinking mead beside a collapsed altar. Quirky tidbit. 2. Protestant reformers begin whitewashing medieval church murals. Sometimes they paint verses over them. Sometimes they just draw beards on all the saints. One particularly bold vandal adds spectacles to the Virgin Mary. Even Edward, serious and sickly, begins issuing religious proclamations. He's learning to rule through parchment, his words always polished by older hands. Historians still argue how much influence Edward really wielded. Some say he was a puppet. Others argue he had a genuine theological interest and helped accelerate reform. You see him at council meetings, legs swinging beneath the table, voice calm, but oddly authoritative. He once corrects a bishop mid-sermon, and that bishop apologizes. The boy may be small, but he's not invisible. Still, there's an unease in the palace. The ghost of Henry lingers not as a phantom, but as a standard no one quite dares match. He once filled every corridor. Now everyone speaks a little softer, as if trying to find the edges of the new reign without waking something they can't control. You drift past the gardens where roses still bloom, and the air smells of time and change. Edward writes verses about faith. The country braces, and you as ever watch. If Henry VIII's court was a roaring fire, brash, hot, and prone to setting things ablaze, then Edward VI's reign is a lantern in the fog. Dimmer, yes, but still capable of revealing uncomfortable truths, especially about Henry's legacy. You sit beside a clerk copying new royal edicts, his quill scratching like a mouse in a pantry. He's muttering under his breath. You lean in. What's the trouble? They've changed the wording again. Yesterday it was Supreme Head of the Church. Today it's just Supreme Governor. The semantic shuffle begins. Mainstream fact, Henry VIII styled himself Supreme Head of the Church of England, a bold claim that placed him above both Pope and clergy. But by Elizabeth's time, this changed to Supreme Governor, a clever compromise that sidestepped theological objections, particularly from those who didn't think women could head the church. But let's not jump ahead. In Edward's reign, Henry's religious revolution is refined, sanded down and occasionally polished until it sparkles at least from a distance. The people aren't entirely on board. Quirky tidbit 1. In Devon and Cornwall, peasants revolt in 1549 demanding the return of the old Latin Mass and their traditional religious rituals. They call it the Prayer Book Rebellion. Their slogan, "We want the old religion and the king's body in peace." The last bit might be metaphorical. Might. Quirky tidbit 2. A pamphlet circulates claiming that Henry VIII was seen rising from his tomb at night to check if altar candles were properly snuffed. You suspect satire, BM, but part of you also doesn't. Meanwhile, Catherine Parr has remarried to Thomas Seymour. Yes, that Thomas, brother of the Lord Protector and walking red flag in doublet and hose. Historians still argue what Catherine saw in him. Charm, recklessness. A desire to live outside of politics for once. Whatever it was, it ended poorly. He was later executed for treason. She died in childbirth. It's almost poetic, almost. Back at court, Edward grows paler by the month. The Child King writes essays on piety and sends letters to foreign rulers. His handwriting is neat, his faith rigid, but his lungs fragile. You see the worry in the servant's eyes, another king not long for this world. And still, no one speaks too loudly of Henry. His will is referenced, his laws are cited, but his name whispered. It's as if he might walk through the chapel doors at any moment, demand an annulment, and declare himself 25 again. He won't, of course. But memory like power doesn't disappear. It just waits for its next act. You've never seen such a collection of long faces outside a painting of the Last Supper. The boy King Edward VI is dying. His cough, once discreet, now echoes through the palace halls like a ticking clock no one can stop. He hides it with a handkerchief monogrammed and blood-speckled. Everyone pretends not to notice, but they do. Oh, they do. In chambers and chapels, the murmurs begin. Who will inherit? Will the Reformation survive? Is there still time to pivot the entire kingdom like a wooden ship in a tight harbor? Because let's be honest, the only person more divisive than Henry VIII was the girl waiting in the wings. Mainstream fact. Edward VI died in July 1553 at the age of 15. Before his death, under the influence of John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, Edward altered the line of succession to exclude his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth, and named Lady Jane Grey, his Protestant cousin, as heir. So now the court is trying to sell England on the idea of a queen no one has met who rules from a distance, and has the political clout of a particularly well-read teacup. It's not going well. Quirky tidbit. Number 1. When Lady Jane Grey is told she is queen, she bursts into tears. She reportedly clings to a bedpost and says she never asked for this. A true Tudor, she eventually accepts once someone explains there's no opt-out clause. Quirky tidbit. 2. Courtiers scramble to find portraits of Jane to hang in the halls. One over-eager herald mistakenly hangs a picture of Catherine Parr. No one corrects him for 3 days. Meanwhile, Mary Tudor Henry's eldest daughter isn't exactly playing along. She gathers her allies, mounts a horse, and sets off toward London, with a face like thunder and a retinue swelling by the hour. Historians still argue whether Edward's exclusion of Mary was truly his own idea, or engineered entirely by Dudley. Either way, it backfired faster than a musket packed by an apprentice. You stand in the palace garden as news arrives. Jane's reign has lasted 9 days. That's not even long enough to learn the seating chart. Mary is declared queen. The court pivots faster than a Tudor table dancer at a feast. Banners are swapped, oaths re-sworn, and Jane is sent to the Tower, not yet to die but not quite free either. You watch from the shadows as Mary rides into the city. Her cheeks are flushed, her grip on the reins iron. She doesn't wave. She doesn't smile. She reigns. The first woman to rule England in her own right. And you think once again of Henry, who broke the church in half for a son and still passed the throne to a daughter. It's the kind of irony he might have laughed at, or had someone else executed for noticing. The bells toll for Mary, but not with joy. They ring with weight, with the heavy iron cadence of solemnity and warning. Queen Mary, I has taken the throne, and almost immediately England begins to smolder. It starts quietly. Latin returns to the Mass. Candles flicker again in once bare chapels. Priests cautiously unpack old vestments long hidden behind linen and silence. You, curious as ever, drift toward the churches. The air smells like incense and hesitation. Mainstream fact: Mary, yeast daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, sought to restore Catholicism in England after the Protestant reforms of Edward VI. Her reign was marked by a series of reversals. Latin liturgy reinstated, married priests dismissed, and papal authority reasserted. The reforms are sweeping but not gentle. The burnings begin. Quirky tidbit, yes one. In her efforts to root out heresy, Mary oversees the execution of nearly 300 Protestants, including notable figures like Bishops Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley. These public burnings earn her the nickname Bloody Mary. Though it's worth noting, the term becomes widespread only later thanks to Protestant historians. Quirky tidbit, a Spanish courtier remarks that the English weather is less cold than their expressions. The English court doesn't appreciate the joke. It also doesn't appreciate the Queen's Spanish husband, Philip II. Yes, you heard correctly, Mary marries Philip of Spain. Not exactly a crowd favorite. Historians still argue whether Mary's decision to marry Philip was purely strategic, emotionally driven, or both. She needed a strong Catholic ally, but in marrying a foreign prince, she stirred deep national unease. Some even feared England would become a Spanish vassal. You watch the wedding procession. It's polite, not jubilant. The crowd cheers because it's expected, not because it's felt. Even Mary looks uncertain. She yearns for a child, an heir, a Catholic future for England. But the child never comes. Instead, there's a phantom pregnancy, perhaps the most haunting detail of her reign. Mary prepares for labor. Cribs are carved. Prayers are whispered. No child. Just a swelling that fades, a nation's hope deflated like a punctured drum. And always in the background, the memory of Henry. It was for her mother that he changed the world, and for her the world now resists. The people grumble. Parliament stalls, the fires keep burning. You wander through a city that smells of smoke and ink. Pamphlets flutter underfoot. Preachers speak in riddles. Courtiers practice neutrality with the skill of jugglers. And Mary, lonely, ill, and unyielding, presses forward. One queen against a kingdom of ghosts. The queen coughs. You think it's nothing at first. Just a tickle in the throat, the kind that comes from damp corridors or too many whispered prayers. But it lingers, like suspicion, like regret. Mary, eye begins to fade. Her court still shines with gold-threaded tapestries and solemn choirs, but behind the embroidered pageantry is a woman unraveling, physically, politically, emotionally. And the country is waiting. Waiting for a child that never came. Waiting for fires to stop. Waiting most of all for what or who comes next. Mainstream fact. As Mary's health declined, questions swirled about the succession. Her marriage to Philip II had not produced an heir, and her half-sister, Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn, the woman Mary's mother hated, was the obvious candidate. Obvious and terrifying. To Mary, Elizabeth represented everything she had tried to erase: Protestantism, rebellion, her father's betrayal made flesh. But Elizabeth was also popular, charismatic, fluent in courtly survival, and Protestant. Quirky tidbit number 1. Mary considered naming Philip as regent after her death. Philip, perhaps sensing the mood, politely declined. His exact words are lost, but you imagine something like thanks. but I left my ambition in Madrid. Quirky tidbit number 2. Elizabeth lived much of Mary's reign in a delicate state of semi-house arrest. She was questioned multiple times about alleged involvement in Protestant plots, but always managed to say just enough but never too much. Her diary entries are maddeningly vague. Her letters diplomatic to the point of invisibility. Historians still argue whether Mary truly intended to execute Elizabeth. Some suggest she was persuaded by advisors to spare her. Others believe Mary herself could never bring herself to kill her own sister, even if she often wished it. You picture Mary near the end, wrapped in velvet rosary slipping through her fingers, praying not for herself, but for England. A Catholic England. A child to inherit her faith. Neither prayer is answered. She dies in 1558. No funeral effigy on a horse, no towering monument, just candlelight caution in a shifting tide. The palace doesn't cheer when Elizabeth is proclaimed queen. But the courtiers walk faster. The servants stand straighter. The air, once thick with smoke and uncertainty, begins to smell sharper. You look toward the horizon. A new dawn. Red, gold, and cunning. The sunlight on the Thames looks brighter, as if even the river knows something's changed. Elizabeth is queen, and you can feel it not in trumpets or feast, but in the way everyone suddenly remembers how to breathe again. There's laughter in the courtyards. Music spills from chambers like it's been locked away for too long. The court puts on its finest ruffs and gets back to the serious business of pretending it's happy. And Elizabeth, she performs like she was born on a stage. Mainstream fact. Elizabeth I took the throne in 1558 and swiftly set about stabilizing a kingdom rocked by religious turmoil. Her approach was famously pragmatic. She established the Elizabethan religious settlement, which attempted to find a middle path between Catholic and Protestant extremes. But don't mistake moderation for meekness. The new queen knows exactly where to draw the line. Her first royal portrait shows her standing tall, crown in hand, gaze direct. It's less young woman ascending and more, this is my throne now, try me. And try her they do. Quirky tidbit number 1. Elizabeth insists that all portraits depict her with unnaturally smooth skin and youthful features even well into her 60s. Artists are required to use pre-approved face templates, effectively inventing the 16th century version of Photoshop. Quirky tidbit number 2. A visitor once remarks that Elizabeth owned over 2,000 dresses. You imagine at least 50 of them were worn solely to deliver bad news to foreign ambassadors. At court, suitors appear like mayflies in spring. France offers a duke. Spain flirts, then retreats. Even Robert Dudley Elizabeth's favorite dance is dangerously close to something more. But nothing sticks. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's decision to remain unmarried was strategic romantic or trauma-induced. Likely all three. The Virgin Queen knew the crown rested easier when her hand was unpromised. And what of Henry? You still hear his name. Sometimes it's invoked in Parliament. His Majesty's will dictated this. Other times in gossip, His Majesty would have chopped his head off, often just in size. Elizabeth doesn't speak of him often, but once you pass her as she studies a miniature of her father, she doesn't smile, but she doesn't look away either. You wonder what she sees. A monarch, a monster, or a man whose crown was always just slightly too heavy. Either way, she wears it better. You're not sure when it happens, maybe during a joust or over roast pheasant at supper, but at some point you realize Elizabeth's court doesn't just rule England. It performs England. Everything is ceremony now. Every glance, every laugh, every embroidered glove is freighted with meaning. It's the theater of power, and Elizabeth is both playwright and star. And behind the curtain, the ghost of Henry still looms. Mainstream fact. Elizabeth Di cultivated a powerful image of royal majesty and divine favor, bolstered by portraits, public appearances, and tightly controlled messaging. Her court became a center of culture and influence where poetry, music, and drama flourished under her watchful eye. This wasn't vanity, it was survival. She had no husband, no heir. Her power lived in image. Quirky tidbit number 1. Elizabeth owned a perfumed fan laced with crushed pearls and cloves, allegedly used to waft away the smell of overripe courtiers. You imagine her using it like a royal punctuation mark. Flutter sniff dismissed. Quirky tidbit number 2. To maintain her persona, Elizabeth timed her public appearances so precisely that courtiers used them to set their pocket sundials. Once, when her coach broke a wheel, half the Privy Council had a mild panic attack thinking she'd been kidnapped. And still, she rules alone. No king, no child, no slip-up. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's celibacy was a calculated act of political genius, or the result of trauma and distrust perhaps from watching her mother executed her stepmother's shipped off and her sister wither in loneliness. You lean on a windowsill watching foreign ambassadors enter the palace with carefully neutral faces. They all want something. Alliance, influence, maybe just a peek behind the velvet mask. Elizabeth gives them nothing, only a glance, a clever turn of phrase, and an exit. She speaks of peace but sharpens her navy. She dances but always one beat apart. And she writes letters to lords, to kings, even to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, proving that England's voice now carries farther than her father's sword ever could. And what of Henry? He's a legend now. Young nobles toast to him. Dramatists whisper about plays with bloodied kings and 6 wives. His armor stands in the tower, burnished and hollow. Elizabeth passes it sometimes on her way to council. She never stops. But once, just once, you see her reach out and touch it. Lightly, as if testing its weight. You step through the palace gardens where the scent of roses is strong enough to make even the politics feel briefly bearable. But make no mistake, beneath the silk and sweet herbs the queen is aging. Not fading, not weakening, just shifting. She smiles a little less easily. Her banter grows sharper like a well-used quill. The courtiers murmur about gray strands hidden beneath powdered wigs and jewels that gleam brighter than her eyes. But still she endures. Mainstream fact. By the late 1590s, Elizabeth II had ruled for over 4 decades. Her reign saw the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the flourishing of the English Renaissance, and a long stretch of relative internal peace, though not without famine, rebellion, and personal toll. She is England now, and England, you notice, is beginning to ask what happens next. Quirky tidbit number 1. Elizabeth banned all mirrors from her private chambers in her later years. According to legend, she didn't want to see the face that age was painting. Once a maid snuck in a hand mirror. It allegedly vanished by breakfast. Quirky tidbit 2. The queen took to elaborate disguises when visiting the countryside. Peasants claim to have seen a mysterious gentlewoman in green velvet inspecting grain stores, asking suspiciously intelligent questions about taxes. Officially, she was never there. And still she danced. Masks were held in her honor. Great spectacles of allegory where goddesses praised her virtue and knights fainted at her feet. Everyone applauded. But the questions grew louder, if not braver. Who would rule after her? Historians still argue how deliberate Elizabeth's silence was on the matter of succession. She never publicly named an heir, though many assumed it would be James VI of Scotland, her Protestant cousin and son of the very Mary Queen of Scots she had executed. Yes, that Mary. The one whose letters were intercepted, whose plots were foiled, whose final breath Elizabeth claimed not to have ordered. A death signed in ink, but maybe not in full intention. The crown weighs differently near the end. You catch Elizabeth staring longer at courtiers' children, at the field stretching beyond the palace, at nothing at all. There's no grand speech, no majestic farewell, just a slowing, a quieter council chamber, a heartbeat in winter. And when she finally slips away in 1603, England does not roar, it exhales. 4 monarchs have passed in your long stroll through Tudor England, and yet none linger like her. The last Tudor, the daughter of Henry, who died without marrying, without children, without surrender, but not, you think, without love. And certainly never without power. The bells toll again. Not for war, not for warning, for the end of an era. You stand outside Whitehall Palace on a gray March morning in 1603. The wind is mild. The city is quiet, too quiet. No fire this time, no whispered treason, no sudden thunder of horses through the cobbled streets. Just mourning cloaks, just bowed heads. Elizabeth is gone, and with her the Tudor line, so dramatic, so excessive, so relentlessly entertaining, draws its final breath. Mainstream fact: Elizabeth I died on March 24, 1603. She was the last Tudor monarch, having ruled for 45 years. With no direct heir, the crown passed peacefully to James VI of Scotland, uniting the thrones of England and Scotland under the new Stuart dynasty. Peacefully, imagine that. No chopped heads, no panicked marriages, just an ending. You visit her funeral procession. It's vast. Black drapery, black plumes, black horses. But the crowd isn't merely grieving a queen. They're saying goodbye to something more intimate, a story that shaped them. Quirky tidbit. Her effigy on the funeral hearse had a wax face so lifelike that onlookers reportedly bowed as it passed. Some even claimed it winked, though this may have been wishful thinking or nerves. Quirky tidbit number 2. Among her possessions was a locket ring, which when opened revealed tiny portraits of herself and her mother, Anne Boleyn. The ring stayed sealed for most of her life. You can't help but wonder when she last opened it and whether she cried. James arrives soon after. Taller, more Scottish, slightly less theatrical. He walks through the same halls where Henry sulked, where Anne laughed, where Edward studied, where Mary brooded, and where Elizabeth charmed and ruled. You pass him in a corridor. He smells of damp wool and political ambition. He smiles awkwardly. Nice place, he says. Bit haunted, though. Historians still argue whether the Tudors were truly transformational or just particularly good at self-promotion. Some say they redefined monarchy. Others say they simply screamed loud enough for everyone to remember. But as you walk the now empty banquet hall, the question doesn't matter, because the echoes are still here. Henry's footsteps thunderous and stubborn, Anne's laughter brief and bright, Edward's quiet cough, Mary's prayers whispered like warnings, Elizabeth's voice cool as cut glass saying, "I will not make windows into men's souls." And you time traveler, eavesdropper, dreamer, finally reach the last page. The curtain lowers not with a crash, but with a sigh, and somewhere a lute plays one final note. The air stills. You stand in the soft hush that follows a long story, where even the tapestries seem to breathe more quietly their woven nights, finally resting their embroidered swords. The Tudor tale is over, but you linger, because that's what echoes are for. Mainstream fact: the Tudors ruled England from 1485 to 1603, ushering in the English Renaissance, the Reformation, and a shift in royal image from divine right to theatrical power. Their legacy endures not just in records, but in imagination's textbooks and oddly persuasive TV dramas. Yet for all their grandeur, they were still human. Hungry, insecure, occasionally hilarious. Quirky tidbit number 1. Henry VIII's corpse. Let's not sugarcoat it, had a rough afterlife. During transport to Windsor, the lead coffin may have leaked, prompting one chronicler to note that a dog licked the floor beneath it. Interpret that as metaphor or poor sanitation dealer's choice. Quirky tidbit number 2. The effigies used in Tudor funerals were so detailed that some were reused with new wigs for later monarchs. Imagine being immortalized in wax only to find your headpiece recycled by your cousin's embalmer. Historians still argue whether Henry VIII was England's most impactful monarch, or merely its most memorable. His policies reshaped church and crown alike, but his appetites, political, romantic, and culinary, often led the headlines. As with most Tudors, the truth is blurry and loudly dressed. You leave the palace. Outside, the world spins on. Markets open. Ships sail. Poets write verses that have nothing to do with royalty. But deep down, you know, the Tudors have left their fingerprint on it all. In the stubbornness of leaders, in the drama of courts and headlines, in every bold rebrand or royal scandal that feels just a little too familiar. And as you slip into bed pulling the covers to your chin, their voices fade. Not because they're silent, but because for now, you're ready to rest. So now, as the last candle gutters low, let the velvet shadows of the Tudor age soften into the warmth of your own room. Let the heavy oak doors creak gently closed behind you, sealing away centuries of drama devotion and delicate plotting. The clink of goblets, the rustle of gowns, the whispered, "Your grace," all settle like dust in your thoughts, comfortable and still. The crown has passed the throne is empty, and you've walked every stone of that long tangled corridor. You did not flinch at a beheading. You did not sigh too loudly during theological debates. You even tolerated the roughs. So many roughs. Now nothing remains but calm. Let your breath slow like the river under London Bridge. Let your limbs sink heavy like armor laid aside after a long day. You have survived Henry and Elizabeth and the entire emotionally unstable Tudor clan. Tomorrow you may visit Rome or Timbuktu. You may wander the Silk Roads or climb the steps of a lost ziggurat. But for now there's only softness, only stillness, only sleep. Let history hold you like an old, well-thumbed book. Let its pages flutter shut. And let the past turbulent, fascinating, oddly soothing keep you company one last time tonight. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.